2CC podcast.
We seem to have this view that there are certain things we can't build in Australia. And trains come to light. The New South Wales government has built, two light rail systems that I know of that have both used foreign rolling stock, and various trains have been bought from overseas. And it's not just the New South Wales government, but right across the country. We seem to buy a lot of Chinese products. Well, the current issue with Chinese companies building Australian trains has highlighted several problems with any building products imported from China. Are they made by companies who exploit their workers? Do they breach human rights? Do the products comply with Australian standards? If we can't get the answers right on Chinese-made products, what will it mean to make sure that local building materials are used instead? Steve Chandler is a property development expert and joins us now. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's look, to me, it seems extraordinary that we can't. There are so many basic things that I know we can make here in Australia that we don't, but. At what point, because we have such stringent, particularly when it comes to building and property development, such stringent, rules and regulations here in Australia, how is it that substandard materials are getting through and slipping through the net, so to speak?
I suppose that the question is, can we prove that they're substandard? And one of our greatest issues is that things that are made overseas, and China's obviously the flavour of the month to talk about what they do. In China, we have to rely on others to say that it complies with the Australian standards. And Australian standards are known throughout the world to be some of the highest, standards requirements, on the planet. Our structural codes, etc., are more stringent than anywhere else. So one of our biggest issues is, how do we know that their products comply with our standards? Just because you get a piece of paper that say it doesn't mean it actually does. So that's the biggest issue for us over here. It's that trust scenario. And when you've got things like the Chinese train company, CRRC, being associated with human rights violations, that's even worse. Now we're talking about people like physically being detrimentally affected in the manufacture of products that we're going to be running around our rail networks for 20 years.
In the federal budget last week, the government included $1.5 billion towards a manufacturing strategy. But you think there should have been something in there to compel, I don't know if we use the word compel, but let's use that for the moment, compel people to use Australian-made products. What do you think they should have done?
I think all of the recipients of that $1.5 million, all worthy components. They had resource and technology. In the critical minerals processing side of things, that's real value add stuff. Food and beverage, that's copped a massive hit recently. With COVID. All the other components that were on the recipient list of that, great things. But when we look at the building industry, the construction industry, it's a massive employer in Australia, and the flow on from the jobs is huge. Now, we used to manufacture a lot of stuff in Australia before we went into these free trade agreements, etc., and suddenly, Australian product became unviable. I think we should have spent a bit of money on, the research and development into better means of manufacture and bringing stuff back to Australia. If our problem compared to places like China is our labour cost, we're not saying that we want anyone to work for half of what their the minimum wage is or anything like that. What we should be looking at is the technologies that can make our manufacturing far more cost effective. Because coming back to the trains, you look at between New South Wales and Victoria, that's something like $7 billion worth of trains that are being made overseas. That money in Australia, how many people would that employ? That's massive.
Oh, absolutely, and particularly when we have fairly renowned train builders here in Australia. There's no doubt about that. But when you talk about building products, what sort of products are we talking about? Because we still roll our own steel here. I know a lot's coming in from overseas now, but we still have companies like Stramit and Metrol and those mobs that are rolling steel here. I think James Hardie still make Fibro, and CSR still make that kind of product. But Is there anything that we've stopped making?
Well, if you look at BlueScope Steel as, you know, our one and only steel making company in Australia,
Yep.
They've got 2 blast furnaces down at Port Kembla. You know, they shut one of those down, 5 years ago, because they couldn't compete with foreign entities. And I remember the media at the time was reporting how, you know, they were still making a loss with the one that they kept going, and it was touch and go as to whether they actually shut that one down as well.
And the irony is it's Australian iron ore that they're using to make the steel overseas anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, all these things is just a compound. The free trade agreements really have, you know, hurt our employment over here. You know, the idea behind it is to be able to give us all a better, you know, standard of living with access to, you know, other products for you know, reasonable prices. But look, you know, no one would have forecast what was happening with COVID, you know. But if we had have these trains being manufactured in Australia, $7 billion worth of that's a stimulus package in itself. So I just see that we should be helping the industries, the manufacturing industries that are over here. You know, the automotive industry, you know, in its prime before they announced shutdowns, you know, I think they were getting something like $1.5 billion a year in support.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying we should be supporting all those industries, but what we should be doing is helping with research and development to be able to bring our manufacturing back so that whenever we have the next financial glitch, whatever causes it, who knows, but whenever it happens, that we've actually got some industry over here that can keep people employed.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Steve Chandler, good to speak to you this morning.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Steve Chandler, he's a property development expert. I think he makes a lot of good points.
We're talking Canberra, 2CC, we're talking Canberra.
A 2CC podcast.